Hey guys, it's Emily, and today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in May. May is typically always just like the best reading month for me. Like, I don't know why it always is that way, but like May, I am like all of a sudden just like super motivated to read like a ton. This is probably like my best, I think, reading month I've ever had in my life. I technically read, I don't know, a total of 16 books, but 3 of those I DNF'd, which I will talk about first. And 2 of those books were Wattpad books. I'm not going to talk about the Wattpad books like extremely much, but I'll mention them and maybe like briefly what they're about and like briefly what I didn't like about them. I'm not going to go too in depth on my thoughts on them just because I'm going to be talking about the Wattpad books in another video that I have planned for the future. So we're going to do it a little bit differently. Instead of like the order I read them, we're just going to talk about my least favorite to favorite. So the first one, my least favorite book I read this month was my one and only, I can't remember who it's by on Wattpad, but it's what it's called. Basically, this is about a girl and this guy, and this guy, like, has, like, saved, like, a girl from a tree, I guess, when she was little, and they've become, like, best friends ever since. But what, like, our female lead doesn't know is that, like, they're, like, he's a werewolf, and that like they're mated to, he's like, she's his mate essentially. Lots of drama that comes with that. While this plot sounded promising and like I would read like another book with this plot, I find when we get into alphas and mates and all that stuff, I feel like with werewolf stuff, like it's too much for me. Though I love reading about werewolves, I have like a soft place in my heart for werewolves. I just love them. This was not it. This was the weird side of werewolves. And after this, because it came to the point where I did not ship the characters. The relationship was the weirdest thing. In general, I didn't like the relationship because we had a controlling, like, I get that he's a werewolf, but like he was so controlling, and like these two were so like together, like literally like never left each other's side basically. One point when she was at school and he had like left the school without her, she had no idea what to do or how to get home, that she literally like just ran to a tree and stayed there. Like, he's so possessive, like when she tries to get out of her comfort zone and tries to talk to other people, like he's so mad about it, and it's kind of ridiculous. He's a little too possessive, and it wasn't cute. That's the gist of my thoughts on that, but I'll get more in depth in a later video. Another Wattpad book that I read, which I got like so far through in like one night, because it was just like, these books were like really addicting, but like they were super problematic that I'm like, I don't think I need to continue on with this. It's not worth it, even if it's really addicting. But the other one I read was Bittersweet Friendship, but this is like a friends to lovers, I guess, situation, but like super problematic wise. The character has a crush on her best friend, and then they start kissing, essentially. And that's the basics of this. But there's a lot of issues, I feel like, that come with this book. Love interest was constantly like kiss the main character, and just kind of confuse her constantly. And it was just a weird thing, like, because our main character was feeling more of it, but like the love interest wasn't. I don't know at that point. I don't really know what the gist of this was. But like, I kept reading, and then eventually it like turned like smutty, which I was not expecting it to. I didn't want to read that, so like majority of this I was like even like skipping through. I'm like, I don't want to read about the smut, no thanks, that's not for me. So I was just kind of like, adios, bye. I got to the point when they got together, and I'm like, yeah, I think I'm done. The other book I DNF'd this month was 17th Summer by Maureen Dowling. This book basically follows like a summer romance that took place in the 1950s, I guess. This was written way back when, which I did not want to know when I bought this, because obviously this looks like a pretty cute, like, 2000s-ish cover. When I bought this, it was like, oh, it sounds like a summer romance, like, I'm down with that, I like that thing. It's like a will they or won't they, like, is it just a summer fling, you know, kind of that kind of stuff. I quite enjoy usually books that take place in summer. You know, like, it's getting close to summer, and I've owned this book for, like, a long time, so I thought I'd finally get to it, only to find out later on that this was like one of the first like young adult books ever to be published, and it was published like a long time ago, like I think back in like the 1950s or something like that. While I can appreciate it for what it was back then, and I think is cool to see kind of how, like, teen books kind of started, essentially, in that kind of sense. This book was kind of boring because it kind of brings out all the stereotypes, or not stereotypes, but, like, you know, like, it's basically, like, everything I've read before, so it was really boring, and, like, I honestly, there was a lot of just, like, things where, like, the plot was just dragging. I didn't care for the romance, I didn't really care for the characters, and I just didn't care for any of it, that I just decided not to continue on with this. Overall, wasn't a fan of this. I think it's cool to see, and, like, I read, like, the first part, but then I looked up, like, a summary of the rest of the book, and just realized it was not worth it to continue, because it was just dragging on, and I did not care, and I wanted to chuck this book out the window. I DNF'd it. Alright, now we're getting on to books that I have completed. At the bottom of my list, we have The Betrothed by Kiera Cass, which I think I gave 2 stars. This is Kiera Cass's new book, and if you didn't know, I'm a huge Kiera Cass fan. I loved The Siren, I love the Selection series, I, like, absolutely adore her books. So, and, like, the Selection series was the book that got me into reading, so I was so excited to read this, because, like, it sounded similar to the Selection with royalty and all, and, like, I just, in generally, like, I love the way Kiera Cass writes, I love her love stories. This was nowhere near, I feel like, as good as the other books that she's written are. This book was probably, like, I think the biggest disappointment of 2020. Out of all the books I've read, this is the biggest disappointment, I think, so far, and I think it probably will remain that way. But this book is about a girl named Hollis, and she's kind of, I don't know, her and the king are kind of flirting, essentially, and he seems kind of into her, so she's probably going to end up marrying the king. Then this boy from another country shows up, and she starts questioning everything she knows, and she starts to fall for him. This was so disappointing. It has, like, such a cool plot. Like, I like the plot line. Like, it sounded like something I would enjoy, but it was very badly executed. I didn't really care for Hollis as a character. I also didn't like, the love story was so, like, badly developed that I did not care. I did not shed a tear at this book. I didn't care for any of the characters, and I think it was just overwhelmingly, like, so bad. Like, I couldn't tell you a good thing, like, about this book. Like, the politics I didn't even care about. Like, there was nothing, like, that was good about this book, essentially. That I think the 2 stars is even pretty generous, but I think I gave it 2 stars just because I do like Kiera Cass, so that's why I did get 2 stars rather than 1 star, even though there's nothing good about this book, and I strongly dislike this book, and I'm so disappointed by it. We'll see if I read the sequel. I don't really feel like I want to read the sequel when that comes out, because honestly, I have no interest in the story, and unless, like, everyone's like, oh my goodness, like, the sequel's, like, way out of the first book, and, like, it's absolutely wonderful, unless, like, that's the case, like, I'm not really looking forward to it. And I've been looking forward to the book for, like, so many years now, that I'm just kind of, I don't know, I'm disappointed by it, and I wish it was better. I wish I was coming to you smiling about this book and saying, wow, this is, like, the best book ever, but sadly, that was not the case. 2 stars. The next book we have is The Honey Don't List by Christina Lauren, which I gave 3 stars. This book is about this home improvement couple, and they are about to release a book about marriage and how to have, like, a good marriage, when the 2 assistants stumble in upon the husband with another girl. Wife ends up finding out about this, so the 2 assistants, and they have to go on this book tour with them to make sure that they kind of keep, like, their perfect relationship, like, a show for the cameras, and that they don't mess anything up for the press, because, like, obviously they want the book to sell, and, like, it's not going to sell if, like, people realize their marriage is, like, an absolute shambles. And then the 2 assistants end up falling in love as well. I did quite enjoy The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. I thought that was pretty good. This one I did not enjoy that much at all. Though I got through it fairly quickly, this book wasn't great. There was nothing really memorable about it. It's not something I'm gonna think about forever and ever, and I honestly, like, already forgot most of it, and, like, had already forgotten it, like, right after I finished reading it, which you can see in my reading vlog, where I go actually talk that I forgot about this book. I didn't care for the characters that much either. The romance was, I don't know if it felt insta-lovey just because the book was going by so fast and the book was pretty short. There was not a lot of development with the characters. Some people described it as a slow burn. I highly disagree. A lot of people found, like, I guess that the relationship, like, of the home improvement couple, was sad or something, but, like, honestly, like, I couldn't care for what was going on with them because they kind of had villainized those characters, and I don't think that kind of plot line like played into the love story between our two main characters, and so I didn't care for this, and it's pretty forgettable, and I probably won't think about it ever again after this video. The next book we have is the last book that I just finished like last night. So the last book I finished in May, and that is The Fascinators by Andrew Elipios. I think I'm gonna give this a 3. I hadn't really decided my rating last night. It was between a 3 and 3.5, but I think I'm gonna give it a 3 just because of how disappointed I was at the end of it. I think the first half of this book is really strong, really entertaining, really good, and the second half kind of fell flat, but this book is about this guy and this group of friends, and they are like a part of like this magic club at school when one of the friends ends up getting involved with like some bad magic people, and essentially now they are after him and his friends. That all sounds so great and so interesting, but then it took a turn and like flopped completely during the second half of the book. So the first half is like really strong, really like promises all of that and like sounds really good. The second half, however, I did not care about. There was a love triangle, and I am mad about how it ended up because I felt like the characters were generally better off friends. I think the characters were, at the end of the book, better off friends, and I'd rather there not have been a love triangle because, and that's not what I was expecting going into this because it's nowhere in the synopsis that there would be any hints of a love triangle, and it made me kind of mad. I didn't care for it, and like I thought the endgame ship was pretty obvious, but then it wasn't anymore. So I was shipping the wrong thing the whole time. While I can appreciate some of the realism of the teenagers and stuff, I think that was written pretty well. I liked that the teenagers felt like realistic in a sense when things didn't work out, like, and things went awry. I understood in a sense as to why. That's not what this was, I don't know, advertised or what I was expecting going into it, because this was compared to the Raven Boys, so I was kind of expecting, you know, to have like this strong friend group, and that's essentially not what ended up happening. I feel like while the magic was cool and stuff, and I think there's some cool stuff in this book, I was disappointed overall. And this was like one of my most anticipated releases of the year, so I feel like most of my anticipated releases have so far just gone downhill. This and The Betrothed so far have just been absolute flops. Hopefully I can make some good releases that I'm more excited about. This one was just sadly not what I had expected. I wanted more out of it, and I wish the story took a different direction than the one that it did. Then we have The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. This book is about a girl named Stella, and she has autism and Asperger's, and so with that she hasn't really had a lot of relationship experience, so she hires a male escort to kind of teach her about every part of a relationship, essentially. And overall, I gave this book 3 stars. But this book, like, overall, like, I feel like compared to my other 3 stars, is like the high of the 3 stars, where there wasn't anything wrong with this book. There was, like, a lot of actually good stuff with this book, but it wasn't, in general, for me. I only really picked it up because Helen Huang wrote it, because I love The Bride Test so much. I kind of expected I would at least decently like this, and I think that is what this book accomplished. But I knew going into it, like, I wasn't gonna get, like, a super high rating, and I wasn't, like, I probably wasn't unless it was gonna, like, really surprise me, which it did surprise me. I did end up liking it, I think, more than I expected to. I expected kind of maybe I wouldn't like this book as much. I actually ended up really liking the characters. I liked how we got to see some of the characters from The Bride Test in this book, and overall, I think this was a pretty decent book. I think, so this is, like, the higher of my 3 stars, where, like, I have nothing, like, negative to say about this book, besides the fact that it just wasn't for me personally. I am glad that I read it, so I can, like, I do know, like, how I feel about it, I guess, now. Overall, I think it is a good book. If it sounds interesting to you, then you can pick it up, but it wasn't for me, but it was overall pretty decent, pretty good. Then we have Kiss Him Not Me Volume 2. This is the second volume, obviously, of the Kiss Him Not Me manga series. So I read the first manga, I think back, was it March? And overall, I did decently enjoy it. While I can recognize that it had problems, I thought it was still fun, so I decided to continue on with the series. This manga series basically follows this girl, and she is a fangirl, and she kind of doesn't really do relationships herself, but she, like, ships people from afar, and she loves this anime, but then her favorite character dies, and she's crying in her room for a week, and all the boys at school start to notice her. This is like the second volume, I guess, following that, and these boys are all trying to pursue her. I'm hoping it talks definitely more about like her image and stuff like that, and like if guys can like, the guys can see like it's not, they're pretty invested in her life, but I just don't want it to be a looks thing. And I mean, like, one of the guys generally does like her, liked her before like all this happened, and that's why I'm rooting for him. The other guys kind of just all of a sudden started noticing her, so I'm excited to see where the third volume is going to go and where the rest of the series is going to go. I think I gave this 3 stars as well. I thought it was pretty good as a follow-up, and it was just a fun to read. Then the next book I read, or the next book on my list, is Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo. This is the second book in the the second book in the Grisha trilogy, and the Grisha trilogy essentially follows this map maker named Alina, who was an orphan and she's essentially raised human until she finds out she actually has Grisha powers. I think most people know about this book or have read this book. At this point, I'm just late to the bandwagon. This is the sequel to that, and sadly I was disappointed once again. This was not what I generally expected from the sequel. I thought this book was like more of a bridge book. Like, I read the first book in a day, so it was very like exciting and well paced, and I was interested the whole time. Where this book like just dragged the whole time and took me quite a while to get through. I kind of didn't care for the most part. I didn't care about the characters as much. They kind of, their enjoyment for me of their arcs went down, and generally if I don't care about the characters, I'm not going to care about the plot. Like, I still care about them, essentially, but my enjoyment of them went down. They all did dumb things, and this book was literally just a bridge book. While I did think it brought up some, like, important points that, like, we're gonna explore further within the next book. Like, the first 100 pages were really interesting, and, like, the last 100 pages were really, really interesting, but, like, the rest of the book was just a drag, and, like, I think this book could have been a whole lot shorter and still gotten its point across, but there was a lot of boring stuff. We got introduced to some new characters who, like, I'm probably going to forget about by the time I get to Rune and Rising, because I find with the side characters in this book, unless, like, they're, like, the Darkling, Mal, or maybe even Nikolai. Nikolai I'm probably gonna remember. But, like, all the other side characters, like, I honestly do not remember them at all when they were, like, mentioned in this book. I had to, like, go back, like, deep into my brain and be like, who the frick was this person? I feel like the side characters aren't really written well, but, like, I can't really differentiate them from the others, and so, like, I don't really know who they are, besides, like, I guess their weird names, but, like, I really forget about them. Overall, this was kind of just disappointing compared to the first book, but I've heard good things about the last book, so hopefully I end up liking that one. I gave this a 3.5. I don't know if I said that, but I gave this a 3.5, so it was alright, but not what I wanted from the sequel. The next book on this list is The Silence Between Us by Alison Gervis. This is about a girl who is deaf, and she is going to a hearing school for the first time since she lost her hearing. This is Ellen Voices, as Alison Gervis is hard of hearing in real life. I love Alison Gervis' writing. She wrote In 27 Days, which is one of my favorite books of all time. I gave this one 4 stars. I did quite enjoy it. I think I enjoyed it more at the beginning, but then it was kind of just taking me longer, so I think that's partly why I gave it a smaller rating. And the last part of it, I guess, there was some out-of-character stuff that just didn't make sense to me overall. But overall, this book was pretty fun, and I think does give enough awareness, and overall, the love story was pretty cute, and the plot was really interesting, and I enjoyed all the characters in this book, and I think it was just a fun read, so overall, I really enjoyed this book. The next book on my list is The Shattered Worlds by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner. This is the sequel to These Broken Stars, which follows different characters in the world. We have, like, a guy who's, like, a rebel, and then, like, a girl that, like, works for the government, and quite a fun time, and, like, you're kind of, like, learning more about, the world, because in the first book, while we learned about the world, like, they were kind of, like, stranded somewhere. So this one, we kind of got to know, I guess, more about stuff, and we got to follow different characters and get to know them. Overall, I did enjoy this. There's not really much complaints I have to say, that it just, besides the fact that it just wasn't as good as the first book, and I just generally, like, absolutely adore the first book. I kind of expected going into this, like, I probably wasn't going to love it as much as the first book, but I was hoping that it would be, like, on par with that. I generally enjoyed the sequel. I think it was a good sequel, and I'm excited to read the final book in the series and see where things go next. The next book we have is Across the Universe by Beth Ribas. This is the first book in the Across the Universe trilogy. This book follows a girl named Amy and a guy named Elder, and Amy has boarded this ship and she's going to be in hibernation for 300 years, except she gets woken up 50 years early while her parents are still frozen. And so Elder, he's like the ruler of the ship, essentially, and he's in training to be like the next like eldest, so he's in training to become the next leader of the ship. There's like a love story between him and Amy, though that's really small to the plot line, but it's kind of just like about the ship and their life and stuff, and it's sci-fi. I was in quite a sci-fi mood this month, so I did finally pick this up, and I've owned this book for so long, so I'm glad that I finally did get to it. Overall, I really did enjoy it. I thought the plotline was fun. I loved the characters, and I just think it was a good book. I can't remember what I gave this. I gave it a 4 or a 4.5. I think I gave it a 4. And I think it just like perfectly like quenched my need for a space book. And overall, I just really enjoyed this book and the story, and I'm excited to see where it goes next in the sequel. It's Emily from the future here. So I was editing this video and I realized I forgot to talk about a book. I did have my video cut out, so that might be the reason why I just forgot about that book and it just wasn't in there. For whatever reason, we're gonna talk about it now. Basically, about this guy who went to prison, and he is being let out from prison for this crime he essentially maybe didn't commit, and so now we're kind of, I guess, finding out the truth later on. Also reconnecting with this girl who he used to be best friends with, but since he went to prison, she didn't contact him, but from her understanding, she contacted him, but he never sent anything back to her. There's some miscommunication involved. That's essentially what this is about. I really love Lori Langton's writing, and I really enjoy her books. I read the Dune series that she co-wrote with Carrie Corp, and I absolutely adored it. So this one I also really liked, and I'm glad that I finally got around to it, because it's been sitting on my TBR for the longest time, and I just finally had an excuse to read it, and I really enjoyed this. I got through this so quickly. It was very entertaining, though it was predictable for me. Like, I predicted basically the whodunit person from like page 1, like I knew who it was. Other than that, though, I did find the story very entertaining. The relationship in this was cute, because we kind of had like best friends to, I guess, we're no longer talking to each other, to then like friends again, to lovers essentially. So that, I really enjoyed the relationship. I thought it was unique, and you know, like, I'm kind of sucker for friends and lovers, and this is kind of just like a different version of that, so I really enjoyed that. Mystery aspect was fun, even though like I figured out who did it like on first page, and it turns out I was right. So it wasn't really surprising for me. But I was quite impressed with myself being able to predict it from the first page. The story is just overall like it's a fun story, it's entertaining, and it's like a YA mystery thriller essentially. So yeah, I overall really enjoyed this book, and I would highly recommend it. The next book on my list is Tweet Cute by Emma Lord. This book follows these two characters, Pepper and Jack. Their families, businesses, restaurants are kind of feuding because one restaurant accused the other of stealing their recipe, so they're kind of having a Twitter feud, and the teenagers in the story are running the Twitter feud, essentially. Overall, this book was such a fun story. I gave it a 4.5. I thought it was wonderful and excellent and well executed. The only thing that I was really missing is just needed that extra oomph to be the 5-star. I generally really loved this book. I thought it was such a fun time to read. I was constantly smiling while reading this book, and it was like the perfect like smiley contemporary that like I needed at this point in time. It was so good, such a fun read. I generally loved all the side characters. They were also really fun to read about. So I love a book when like, yes, the main two characters are great, but like the side characters like also like excelled so well. Like I generally cared about them as well, and I wanted to see more of them. Especially Puja, she was wonderful. The relationship was also cute and fluffy and adorable. I love a book that has an online relationship, which this did. And I think like these teenagers were written really well, and like there was some good teenage struggles that like realistically teenagers go through with like figuring out like what they're gonna do after graduation, like figuring all that out and what you want to do with your life. And I think that stress was realistic, so I liked that. Like, I generally just really loved this book. I thought it excelled so well, and I highly recommend this. It's like maybe like the one out of my most anticipated releases that did not flop. I'm excited to read anything else that Emma Lord writes, because this was like absolutely fantastic. It was so cute, so fun. Highly recommend this. The next book on my list is Meconium by Maria Delvana Headley. I gave this book 5 stars. So, that speaks to how much I adored this book, and I'm so glad that I loved it so much. This is like one of my 5-star predictions, and I was right about this. Like, I just knew I would love this, and I totally did. This follows a girl named Azza who has basically been born with this illness that is so rare that, like, none of the doctors know how to treat it. Like, they've named the illness after her. She ends up dying, essentially, and she goes to this world called Meconium, and she figures out more about herself there, and that's all I think you really need to know. This book was so unique to anything, like, I've ever read before. Like, Meconium is just, like, the coolest, well thought out world, and like there was some folklore in here that like I never knew about, and I just think this like idea and this world and this concept is so unique and so cool to anything like I've ever read. I've never read anything like this book. I don't think I can compare it to anything. It's just so cool and such like a fun fantasy. Plus like it has like the real world element, which like I love in a fantasy, is when the real world still exists. We also had a best friend relationship, which we all know I'm super trash for, and I thought this relationship was written so well. Not like the characters didn't need to be together like the whole book to convince me that these two were like actually meant to be together. I feel like in a lot of books like I ship these two characters together and like I want them to be together because I think they'd be cute together. Whereas in this book like I was like completely convinced that these two characters are like soulmates. Like just the way they communicate with one another, like it just seemed like they knew each other like inside and out so well and like were so in love with one another that it was just so cute, so sweet to see. I loved seeing their relationship together. Like they were so wonderful. Like they were soulmates and there's nothing you can say or do to convince me otherwise. Like they are meant to be together. There was like a slight love triangle in this book, but like it's not really like a big thing. A lot of people like said like it actually made sense, unlike some love triangles. Overall, I generally really adored this book. I thought it was such a fun time and such an interesting plot line and story, and I'm excited to see where the story takes us within the sequel. I feel like if it's something unique, weird, something you've never read before, I highly recommend this book. It was just absolutely wonderful. But be prepared that it is weird, and not everyone is going to like this book, and I would understand why, but like it's great. The final book on my list, I think you can probably already guess what it is at this point. I haven't really stopped gushing about it if you have watched any of my recent reading vlogs. And that's These Broken Stars by Amy Kaufman and Megan Spooner. Now, I realize I'm late to the bandwagon with this book. Like, I know this book was, like, popular on BookTube, like, so many years ago. And I finally just got around to it. And I think I started reading it, like, somewhat years ago, but I never finished it. And I only got, like, really close to the beginning, but I finally read this book, and, like, oh my goodness, I absolutely adored this book so much. I'm, like, convincing, like, everyone I know to read this book. I haven't stopped gushing about it to, like, anyone I know. This is currently my favorite book of 2020. I feel like it's gonna stay that way, just because this book was so fantastic, and, like, I don't see how anything can beat that. This book follows a girl named Lilac and a boy named Tarver, and they essentially come from different classes. Lilac is, like, the rich girl, and Tarver is, like, part of the army. Basically, these two characters manage to get on an escape pod together when the ship is crashing, and they crash land on a planet where they are the only two people that are on this planet, and the story goes from there. So it is a hate to love romance, which, like, I absolutely adored the romance in this book, and because, like, they were together, like, all the time, and I just, like romances like that. It was so well developed, so well told. I really adored these characters together. Like, honestly, like, one of my new favorite ships. Like, they're so cute together, and, like, I absolutely, like, I just loved them together so much, and would be upset if anything happened to them. Like, I will fight someone if something happens to them. Like, absolutely just love their characters. I loved the world. The world was so fascinating to read about. It's a survival story, too, and I love survival stories. Like, this was just, like, my favorite survival story I think I've ever read. I just think it excelled. So unique and cool, and you're, like, kind of questioning if the characters are going crazy or if this is, like, legit what the planet is like. It's so, like, they're finding out all these things, and it's so entertaining, and, like, they're all trying to survive, and they're trying to get help, and then they're also falling for each other, but they also hate one another. This book was just, like, amazing in every single aspect that, like, I just absolutely adore it, and, like, I want everyone to read it. I really felt what the characters felt and were feeling. I had so many emotions with this book. It made me happy. It made me want to cry. I think maybe I did cry, like, a little bit. Meconium is also up there with one of my favorite books of all time. But along with this one, like, I absolutely just, like, loved this book so much. And if you were living under a rock like I was for the past little while and you have not read this book yet, please go pick it up. I don't care if you like space. I don't care if you hate space. Like, pick this book up. Like, you'll love it either way. Like, I'm not a huge space fan until, like, this month, and I adored this so much. It took place, like, solely in space, like, and it took place, like, on a space planet. Like, it just, like, I don't care if you like that or you hate that. Like, this is great. It's a survival story. Like, oh my goodness. Like, I love this so much, and, like, words cannot even, like, express how much I love this book. Like, I haven't stopped talking about this book. I need to get my own physical copy of this book, because this is a library book. Like, I just adored this in every single aspect. I thought it was so wonderful and great, and I haven't stopped talking about this book, and I'm not going to stop talking about this book, and you just need to pick it up. These are all of the books that I read in May. Let me know what your favorite book that you read in May was. I'd love to hear from you, or what your current favorite book of the year is. I'd also love to hear from you in that aspect, and I will see you guys soon with a new video. Goodbye!